Thank you so much for everyone for joining today. So my name is Travis Aten, and I work for the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. And so I want to welcome you all to this press briefing today on deep sea bed mining. And so just as a quick opener, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition is made up of over 100 non-governmental organizations, fishing organizations, and law and policy institutions working together to protect vulnerable deep sea ecosystems. And so we're here today to highlight the potential for our ocean to be opened up to a new extractive industry called deep sea bed mining. And so from July 10th to 28th next week, the world's governments will convene in Kingston, Jamaica for the International Seabed Authority, or the ISA's, council and assembly meetings to negotiate rules and regulations that, if agreed and adopted, would open up our ocean to the largest mining operation and possibly largest industrial activity humanity has ever seen. The ISA Council and Assembly meetings coincide with the deadline of the 2-year legal loophole that was triggered by Nauru in 2021 on behalf of would-be mining company Nauru Offshore Resources, a subsidiary of the metals company. The loophole stipulates that mining be given the green light by July 9th, 2023, irrespective of whether regulations are in place. Nevertheless, an increasing number of governments are recognizing that the only responsible way to prevent irreversible damage to our critical and fragile deep ocean is to support a moratorium on deep sea bed mining. So the DSCC and our partner organizations, and we'll hear from a few today, will be present in Kingston throughout the International Seabed Authority's Council and Assembly meetings, urging governments to draw a line in the sand and support a moratorium on this destructive and emerging industry before it begins. And so for today's briefing, we have lined up 4 amazing speakers to set the stage for the meetings and the status of deep sea bed mining. So firstly, we'll have Sean Owen, Director of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition, provide an overview of the state of play as we approach the ISA Assembly and Council meetings. Second, we'll have Louisa, Casson, Global Project Lead for Greenpeace's Stop Deep Sea Mining campaign, to highlight the risk of deep sea mining and the growing support amongst countries, scientists, fishers, industry, financial institutions, and other players globally calling for a moratorium. Third, we'll have Bobbi-Jo Dobush, Legal Officer at the Ocean Foundation, dive into why deep sea bed mining is not the route to decarbonization. And then lastly, we'll have Kaja Fjærtoft with the Global ISA Policy Lead for WWF, highlight some of their key findings from the Futurist Circular Report and why deep sea bed minerals are not needed to fuel the green transition. And then, of course, we'll open up to field any questions from you all. And so we'll get started. I'm going to hand it over to Sean.
Thank you very much, Travis, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sure the reason that you're all here is because we are at such an important moment in the race to defend the deep ocean, and we are in the middle of a live political debate on the topic. So the upcoming ISA meetings are arguably more important than any ISA meetings have been to date, not least in the context, of course, of the adoption of the High Seas Treaty just a couple of months ago. So as Travis has indicated, the next 3 weeks will have the meetings of the council. The first 2 weeks are meetings of the council in Kingston, Jamaica, followed at the end of July by the meeting of the assembly, which is the supreme and governing body of the ISA, and that will include all 167 member states plus the EU. So first to the council meeting. The council meeting will be looking at the negotiations around the regulations and around this question of the 2-year loophole that Travis mentioned. And importantly, there is an expectation that, and Nauru just confirmed at a meeting a couple of days ago in Tonga, that they plan to submit approval for a plan of work as early as September or October this year. So the responsibility of council is tremendous to examine what will effectively be a procedural discussion around how they will look at and how they will consider this expected plan of work. So what we're expecting out of the council discussions is for them to focus on the formulation of a directive to the Legal and Technical Commission, which is the advisory body to council. And we're expecting that the discussions will push towards a request to the LTC that they review the application and issue a report, but do not issue a formal recommendation to the council to provisionally approve the plan of work. So this is a reflection of the growing momentum, both globally, as I think Louisa will speak to in a minute, but the growing momentum also even within the ISA Council of a move toward a pause. So more than 20 of the 36 council members have already stated that they do not support allowing mining to go ahead under the 2-year loophole. And so what we are doing as a coalition is calling on council really to increase their ambition by pushing toward a moratorium. So the council's responsibility is really to look at a decision or to come to a decision that minimizes the risk and the uncertainty. And so we're really calling for the highest level of ambition necessary there. The final week of the meetings in Kingston coming up is the assembly meeting. Now, what's really exciting about going into the assembly meeting is that Chile, Costa Rica, France, Palau, and Vanuatu have together put in a proposal requesting the ISA to have a discussion on the agenda around a general policy on a recess on deep sea mining. So recess, moratorium, precautionary pause, all of this language is basically aimed at halting the accelerated rush that was triggered in particular under the 2-year loophole, but in fact that the ISA has been having these negotiations for the last 10 years around the adoption of a regulatory framework. So this proposal by these 5 countries is critically important. And what's exciting is that this is opening on the floor of the ISA officially for the first time, a discussion around a moratorium, as well as around the future direction of the ISA itself. So I'll just close by saying the threat of deep sea mining is very real and present. But there is still time to act, and governments have an opportunity now in the coming 3 weeks to take strong, responsible decisions. I'll close there, Travis.
Amazing. Thank you so much, for that wonderful overview. So now we're gonna turn to Louisa with Greenpeace to give us a top line risk of deep sea mining and the momentum for a moratorium. So over to you, Louisa.
Thanks, Travis. Hello, everybody. So as a climate activist, I really wish that we could go back in time to the dawn of the oil industry and stop it before the drilling even started, avoid the devastating impact that it's had on our climate, avoid countless oil spills and leaks. And that is the opportunity we have now with deep sea mining. We have the opportunity to get ahead of a new extractive industry and stop it before it can cause harm to our planet. And I think, that opportunity, that historic opportunity, is really what's driving the campaigning momentum and the increased scrutiny that we're seeing all across the world and really fueling this movement against deep sea mining. Because it's incredibly clear that in a climate and nature crisis, the last thing we need is deep sea mining. We would essentially be digging ourselves into a deeper hole, because opening up this new frontier to extraction in one of the last remaining places in our planet that is, relatively untouched, relatively still an intact wilderness, would be devastating. It would drive inevitable and permanent biodiversity loss, and it is taking us in entirely the wrong direction. Just to list through a few of the many reasons why we're so concerned about the prospect of deep sea mining is that even though it has not started anywhere, the warnings from scientists are increasingly stark. We're seeing, in the most comprehensive compilation of biodiversity in the area in the Pacific Ocean that's targeted for deep sea mining, that this is an area absolutely teeming with life. Just a few weeks ago, scientists at the Natural History Museum announced that they discovered 5,000 new species, the vast majority of which are found nowhere else in our oceans. And yet the prospect of sending industrial-sized bulldozers thousands of meters below the waves would lead to direct habitat loss, including the areas that are crucial for breeding grounds for octopuses. It would lead to the risk of species extinctions, which is definitely not what we need when we're seeing governments committing to stop and halt biodiversity loss. We're also talking about opening up industrial extraction in one of the world's largest carbon sinks, and the disruption of carbon cycling on our ocean is something we should all be incredibly concerned about, as well as the pollution that we would see not only on the sea floor from these huge machines churning up sediment plumes, but also the release down from the repurposed drilling ships down into the water column, where we could see clouds of pollution that could have a smothering and suffocating impact on marine life. So I think, again, we can see that this isn't just an issue that's confined to the mysterious depths of the ocean, of which we still have so much to discover, and which makes it impossible for us really to judge at this point the full extent of the potential harm and risk if governments give a green light to this industry, but also the widespread harm throughout our oceans, from, again, the issue of noise pollution, again, starting an industrial activity in a relatively untouched area could have a devastating impact on species like whales and dolphins. And earlier this year, we released a report through our research laboratory looking at the overlap and how at least 30 species of whales and dolphins can be seen transiting through the area targeted for deep sea mining in the Pacific Ocean, and the potential for the frequencies from very loud noise operating 24 hours a day could be really devastating. It could be disrupting the use of frequencies for navigation, for communication between breeding partners, but also communication between mothers and calves. And when we look at the potential impact on endangered species like blue whales, which are only just starting to recover as a result of responsible government action to stop commercial extraction, to put a moratorium in place on whaling, this really risks taking us in the wrong direction. So it's clear that deep sea mining has no place in a sustainable future. And it's not just environmental groups and scientists all around the world saying this. In the last few years, we've really seen an increase in the warnings from both companies. So from the investment side, we're seeing a number of financial actors excluding deep sea mining from their lending portfolios, whether that's private banks like NatWest, Lloyds and Standard Chartered, or whether that's public financial institutions like the European Investment Bank, which has described deep sea mining as unacceptable in climate and environmental terms. We're also seeing companies that are involved in making batteries, in making cars, technology, electronics, that are sort of being cited by the deep sea mining industry as part of their efforts to build social license. These companies are rejecting their name being used, and again emphasizing how the environmental risks are simply too great for them to be associated with it, and so also voicing support for a moratorium. And we've also really seen the resistance being spearheaded by Indigenous communities in the Pacific. It's absolutely outrageous that we're seeing deep sea mining companies continue to marginalize these communities and claim that there would be little impact on people, when in fact many of these communities, church groups, organizations based in Pacific Island nations are really seeing the risk of the darkest days of history repeating themselves. Yet again, they're seeing companies and governments based in the global north seeing the Pacific Ocean as a sort of laboratory for their dangerous experiments. And they're saying, never again. This is why we need to stop deep sea mining before it can even start. And I think, just to conclude, it's worth noting that this year, this was supposed to be the year, according to industry, that was supposed to be the starting gun for industry. As Sian outlined, companies involved in deep sea mining have been throwing everything at making this year the dawn of this industry. And in fact, what they've done is they've seriously underestimated the global resistance to deep sea mining from these range of different organizations, range of different sectors, and subsequently the political pushback. So we're now at a point that rather than seeing a green light for deep sea mining, in fact, we're approaching 20 governments who in the last year have called for us to put the brakes on this industry. Just in the last week, Switzerland joining those calls for a moratorium. Yesterday, Ireland adding their name to those calls for a precautionary pause. And it really feels like in the last 12 months, governments have made landmark commitments to halt and reverse biodiversity loss in Montreal. They've signed and agreed a historic global ocean treaty to protect the high seas. The era of ocean destruction is over, and the most responsible thing for governments to do now is to make sure they're seizing this moment to stop deep sea mining before it starts.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Louisa, for that overview. And it is quite something when we look back at last year at the UN Ocean Conference, and many of us were in Lisbon when, this momentum for a moratorium just began. And here we are literally a year later, and we're approaching 20 governments supporting a moratorium, and from a variety of different sectors as industries as well. So we're seeing wonderful growth in the right direction. And so thank you. Just I want to flag one thing is, so as we're taking questions at the end, if any question does pop up during the presentations, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will try our best to answer your questions at the end there. Thank you. And so up next, we have Bobbi-Jo, who will be providing an overview about why deep sea bed mining is not the route to decarbonization. So over you to Bobbi-Jo.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks everybody for being here. Let's talk a little bit about the greenwashing of deep seabed mining. First, seabed mining is not a climate solution. It's a potential climate disaster. Proponents of seabed mining speak of providing cobalt and nickel to the EV electric vehicle industry, but that industry is rapidly moving away from cobalt and from nickel. Importantly, to start with, lithium, the actual key component in current large batteries, is not found in relevant quantities in the polymetallic nodules being targeted by seabed miners. Also, minerals recycling is now big business. So by the time seabed minerals could come to market, they may be unnecessary. On the other hand, the deep ocean plays a key role in climate regulation. It's part of our global circulation system. Seabed mining is actually a climate amplification risk. It's an unproven industry marketed as a climate solution that could in fact accelerate or intensify changes to the climate. Second, seabed mining is not some sort of kindler, gentler way to get needed minerals. Seabed mining will not lead to closures of land-based mines. Instead, the percentage of the earth being mined will be vastly expanded. Seabed mining for nodules would affect a biosphere larger than the volume of all the fresh water on Earth. That includes the ice and snow. A study commissioned by the International Seabed Authority itself found that seabed mining would not cause overproduction of metals on land, but could lower minerals prices. This could, in turn, drive down safety and environmental management standards in land-based mining, exacerbating the exact ESG concerns. Third, seabed mining is not championed by climate activists. It's championed by corporate actors pushing questionable narratives and by the subsea oil and gas industry. Leading proponents of seabed mining include the Canadian Corporation, the Metals Company, TMC, and Norway, specifically their Ministry of Petroleum and Energy. TMC has been called out by NGO watchdogs for misleading statements to investors. It's been forced by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, to correct formal investor statements. The SEC itself is investigating TMC for potential wrongdoing currently. There are 2 ongoing class action litigations against TMC, alleging that personnel from the company have made false or misleading statements or failed to disclose material information to investors. An unrelated lawsuit was filed just earlier this year. From a finance perspective, TMC's capital and operating expenditures estimates and the financial models that rely on them have been called very naive. Major ocean-based capital expenditures always blow past their budgets, and apparently this is a very conservative budget. TMC's website presents seabed mining as a simple technological venture, but the industry would actually present a novel and extraordinary physical challenge. The company's tests have been riddled with problems, including a controversial spill. Furthermore, TMC's financial models have not been updated to reflect current interest rate levels, which in recent months have made many venture businesses across industries infeasible. Despite this, and despite what Sean very kindly explained to us earlier, TMC's CEO, Jared Barron, insists seabed mining is a foregone conclusion. This falsehood is something he has consistently maintained on investor calls. Mr. Barron downplays extensive diplomatic dialogue regarding a moratorium and precautionary pause, stating TMC is not worried as there is no legal basis for such a pause. These statements do not inspire confidence. Regarding Norway, the country's proposal to open its waters to seabed mining is out of step with best available science and incompatible with a role as a leader of the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. The European Academy of Science Council warned in a report last month that seabed mining may instead be driven by a perceived need to replace revenue generated by and assets left over from the fossil fuel industry. The chief technology officer of the Norwegian seabed mining company, Laka Minerals, wrote an op-ed last year with the title, Marine Minerals, a new opportunity for subsea oil and gas technology. Norway should instead look for truly sustainable opportunities for its technology and its expert workforce. As Louisa mentioned, because of these and other factors, banks and investors are opting out of seabed mining. Countries must also exclude it from their blue economy initiatives. The United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative concluded in a report just last year that there is no foreseeable way in which financing of deep seabed mining activities can be viewed as consistent with the sustainable blue economy finance principles. This is highly relevant for countries who are currently designing their blue economies. Seabed mining is not compatible with the blue economy and mustn't be part of such a framework. Seabed mining will affect many different stakeholders, creating significant liability concerns for companies, sponsors, and financiers. It will destroy underwater cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible. And Indigenous people from throughout the Pacific are speaking out against it, including at the International Seabed Authority. And the many banks have committed not to finance it. All banks should be evaluating whether commitments they have already undertaken implicitly prohibit financing seabed mining. In conclusion, seabed mining is unequivocally incompatible with a sustainable blue economy. It's a scheme that is neither technically nor financially feasible, that will destroy the Earth's last wilderness and endanger our largest carbon sink. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bobbi-Jo, for that overview and really highlighting, that deep seabed mining has no place in our future and, it is not the route to decarbonization that we're all pushing towards. So moving on to our last speaker for today, which is Kaja from WWF, who will be providing an overview of a recent report called The Future is Circular and providing the key findings from that report. So over to you, Kaja.
Thank you so much, Travis, and I hope everyone is able to see my screen now.
Yeah.
Perfect. So as Bobbi-Jo has so kindly just spoken about, one of the key proponents for deep sea mining, one of their main arguments is this need for these minerals for the green transition. And WWF commissioned a report to look into this last year, which is you're seeing the main results of here on your screen. Basically, we wanted this report to answer whether or not deep seabed minerals is needed for the green transition and what the other solutions could be for this perceived minerals shortage. To answer this question, we commissioned this report from SINTEF, which is one of the leading European independent research institutions. This report looks at the mineral demand for a net zero emissions energy system based on the path of the EIA for a net zero by 2050 scenario. So this is the scenario we're hearing from the International Energy Agency based on minerals. It focuses on the 7 critical minerals for the green transition, and those are among the most discussed in studies on potential mineral bottlenecks for the new energy technologies and which demand is expected to grow. So for instance, cobalt, nickel, manganese, rare earth elements, platinum, and copper are among these. The report looks at different pathways that can influence the demand for these critical minerals in this transition. So these are 4 different technology scenarios, and without getting too detailed, it basically takes us from business as usual all the way to a more advanced technology scenario where new technologies that are low in critical minerals take off and become a larger share of the market by 2050. These 4 scenarios are influenced by different technology choices and the level of uptake of these technologies with lower demand for critical minerals, but also by circular economy strategies, including lifetime expansion and reduced demand. In addition, the report also explores how current and higher collection and recycling rates can alleviate these potential mineral bottlenecks and discuss the possibilities of different mineral sources aiding the transition, such as reopening old mines, mining of tailings, and urban mining. Ultimately, this report shows that the choices made in the next few years by governments through policy interventions, investments, and regulations, and by businesses through investment and other business decisions will really shape how much of these minerals will be needed over the next decades and into 2050. The report shows that we can reduce the demand for minerals by up to 58% through investments in circular economy strategies, improving recycling rates and mineral recoveries, and also upscaling game-changing technology such as batteries that use less cobalt and material substitutions. And just to say, this is not sci-fi technology. This is technology that exists, that can be implemented today. These are choices that governments and businesses can make. For instance, we've seen a lot of battery producers, like was already mentioned, move away from cobalt, which has been one of these minerals that's been discussed heavily. It's also important to say that in the next 2 decades, there will be a need for new minerals entering the supply chain to enable this green transition. But the report clearly shows that there's no reason for the deep sea to be open for mining. Contrary, the temporary minerals need can be covered by confirmed mineral reserves, and these reserves do not include the deep sea, which must be managed with social and environmental responsibility guidelines and standards, such as the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. Furthermore, in the last month, the findings of this report have also been further underbuilt by the European Academies of Science Advisory Council's most recent report that calls the narrative that deep sea mining is needed for the green transition misleading. And they also state that diving blindly into deep sea mining conflicts with efforts to protect future generations. So to conclude, the green transition does not need deep sea bed mining to drive a low carbon economy. It is very clear that there is a path ahead to decarbonize with a much lesser material footprint. And it's imperative that governments, business leaders, and investors take this path to ensure that the decarbonization of the economy is responsible and without additional impact upon nature and people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kaja, so much for that wonderful presentation. It is very helpful to even have that visualization on the screen. So yeah, wonderful. And so now we're going to open it up for questions. And as a reminder, please do post them in the Q&A, and that's how we will do our best to address them. And so first, just looking at when you have lots of questions on what is the potential or what could possibly happen at the upcoming ISA meetings. And so first one, I'm hearing the 5 countries have asked for the agenda item in the Assembly on a precautionary pause to DSM are not planning to go to a vote this year. And on the council side, there is no certainty they will give guidance to the technical commission on what to do regarding the 2-year legal loophole. So in this context, how worried are you that Nauru's request for a license could be accepted and in which time frame? And so I think I might pass that one to Sian to start, and then of course we can open up to others that would like to add on or answer as well.
Sure, thank you, Travis. I'm happy to take a first go at this. Our sense as well is that it is unlikely that Assembly will come to a vote in this month. But the two issues are parallel but separate. So there is the question around the discussion, around the proposal for a recess or precautionary pause. And that needs to be negotiated, that needs to be discussed. As Louisa noted, we've seen a great rise in the resistance to a push to mine the deep sea. And we're expecting other countries probably to come forward with similar support for the recess. So whether or not that comes to a vote, there will be critical negotiations going on in Assembly. With respect to the approval for a plan of work, our sense at the moment is that that will not take place in the next couple of weeks because of the rising resistance over the last year or so to approving any plans of work without a regulatory framework adopted or a mining code adopted. Now, a number of the countries that are stepping forward are also saying, but we would like to see the adoption of a mining code. So I think that is going to be a big dynamic, a big tension in the discussions in the next couple of weeks. And it's really hard to predict which way that's going to go. But certainly we're seeing the resolve of the countries that are pushing back, that are pushing, calling for a moratorium, a pause, a recess. I think that resolve will strengthen. So we're feeling confident at the moment that there will be no approval for a plan of work. However, if one is submitted in September or October, that puts tremendous pressure over the negotiations over the next few months. I'm happy to hand over to any of my colleagues who would like to take up from there.
Thank you, Sian. I see Louisa would love to come in. So Louisa, over to you, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's clear is that, this was a pretty high risk bet from the metals company. It was a deeply controversial triggering of this 2-year loophole, particularly during a global pandemic, which was increasing, accessibility concerns for many states in actually participating in the negotiations at the International Seabed Authority. And, I think what's really worth noting is that, this kind of urgency that's really sort of fueled the debate has resulted in, as we mentioned, nearly 20 governments now coming out with a position against deep sea mining and calling for a halt to this industry. I don't think we would have seen that level of interest and pushback if this urgency really hadn't been accelerated by these sort of, this commercial ultimatum that had essentially been placed on governments. And I think it's worth noting as we approach the 9th of July that, it's clear governments have not, felt so compelled by this commercial ultimatum that they need to agree weak rules or hasty rules that would actually officially open up the international seabed to mining. So we are still in a place where no mining is allowed to start in the deep sea. And I think, what's also been really sort of, worth noting in this debate as it really heats up is also the financial side. Bobbi-Jo spoke a lot about this, but worth adding that, in the last few months, we've seen some really high profile divestments from the industry, which again really underline that this is not, an industry with the wind in its sails. In fact, it's in a pretty perilous position, both politically and financially. I think the withdrawal of Lockheed Martin, who had an interest in the industry for decades and actually, decided to sell the UK deep sea mining company, which was confirmed in March, but also Maersk, a major player in global maritime operations, withdrawing their support, selling all of their shares in the metals company, does really clash and draw into question, I think, the hype that we're seeing deep sea miners trying to sort of build up for their industry. And again, the remaining low share price of the metals company is again, a sign of low investor confidence, I think, despite a lot of the bluster that we're seeing from deep sea mining CEOs. So, I think there's a lot of momentum actually that is building against deep sea mining. But until we see, really strong government action to turn their rhetoric and, their kind of words of ocean leadership actually into concrete decisions that can help protect the deep sea, there remains very little standing between, the wonders of the deep ocean and these machines. And that's why we really need to see governments acting and really putting into practice ways to protect this last frontier.
Wonderful. Thank you, Louisa and Sian, for those great answers. And so jumping to, I think this question's for you, Louisa, as well, which is just on the number of countries that have announced their support for a moratorium precautionary pause. And so someone's asking, do you have a list of who those countries are? And does that mean that other countries are against the moratorium if they aren't supporting a moratorium at the ISA? Or is it an issue perhaps that most governments haven't yet addressed or will only be doing so at the ISA meeting?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, we are really seeing a coalition of countries hailing from the Pacific, Latin America, and Europe who are all making statements, and again, using different formulations of wording, but with a similar effect of putting the brakes on this industry. You can find a comprehensive list, I think, on the DSCC website, savethehighseas.org, which is trying to keep up to date with all of the announcements that we're seeing. As I mentioned, there's even been more announcements just in the last week. But I think, again, seeing that real cross-regional support for, putting a halt on this industry is really important. And to the second part of your question, I think, we also need to look at when governments have actually been presented with the question of, would you like to see a moratorium on deep sea mining? This happened in a non-binding resolution at the IUCN World Conservation Congress a couple of years ago in Marseille. And that was really a sign that there is a silent majority who are really in support of a moratorium on deep sea mining. So that resolution was overwhelmingly voted for with support from governments as well as non-governmental organizations. But the governments who were there voted overwhelmingly in support for a moratorium. that was a non-binding resolution. But, we've seen, in terms of other ocean policies, a similar precedent where at a previous World Conservation Congress, governments voted in support of the 30 by 30 resolution when it was non-binding. A few years later, we've now seen that official commitment from governments to protecting 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. So I think, this is again an issue that many governments have absolutely no interest in deep sea mining. It remains, a small handful of governments who are sponsoring exploration. And I think what's really significant in the last year is we're also seeing governments who have had an interest in exploring for the potential of deep sea mining, actually U-turning. So particularly France and Germany are notable, major economies there that, have previously had an interest in exploring for the potential of deep sea mining. And now, based on the science, based on public concern, based on the warnings from so many different sectors, have actually decided that there is no future in deep sea mining, and it's not something that they want to allow to start.
Wonderful. Thank you, Louisa. I have another question here that I'm going to give to Bobbi-Jo regarding the metals company. And so how close are other projects, including state-sponsored companies, to submitting an application to mine? And can you give an overview of the situation, the main players, and any concerns?
Sure, I'll take that. Then, happy to have others give further context. Well, obviously we don't know what exactly everybody else is doing. It's important to note that while there are different sponsoring states, the metals company is involved with various of them. One of the other, TOML, Tonga Offshore Mining Limited, I believe, is also sponsored by the metals company sponsored by Tonga, but is actually the metals company. It's a subsidiary of it, in addition to Nori, which is the Nauru offshoot. But I think that it's really important to talk about where are the other companies, why are they waiting in the wings? And it's, largely because the regulations aren't even close to done. And the science is saying we don't know what we're talking about yet, and we don't know what we stand to lose. But from a company perspective, we talk about the regulations like as if they could be finished maybe later this year. If anyone's actually gone through them, it's like 100 pages of bracketed text in red. Like we're not there. There's so much undone. We're far from it. And if the ISA delegates, member states have been working diligently for decades on these regulations. And all of a sudden there's this big accelerated pace, but I think it's really easy from the outside when you're not, and I don't suggest that it's not particularly fun reading to go through line by line, but we're really, really far away from regulations. There are many unknowns. And the reason that there's so much text in brackets and in red is because conceptually, delegates don't even agree on the big points, like the things that the guiding principles of this. For example, should we have a moratorium or a pause? But how would you share benefits? Are there going to even be enough benefits to be shared globally? And relatedly, the International Seabed Authority has recognized that there won't likely be enough money to uplift any country or to give them meaningful remuneration. And they've suggested that instead there might be a seabed sustainability fund where we could just pool the resources and restore the seabed. But that's actually, one, not possible, and two, the responsibility of contractors. So my point is, everything's up in the air, everything is undecided, and no reasonable company would want to enter into that fray right now. So I think that's why you're not seeing other applications from other companies. And it begs the question, why the metals company? And to be quite blunt, it's because they're running out of money. And they keep getting almost delisted from the NASDAQ, from the US stock exchange. Delisting notices are a big deal. They probably won't get delisted because it's a many-step process and there's a lot of ways to get out of it. For example, by buying stock in your own company or by splitting stocks. It's technical, but it's a big deal to get delisted because it means that delisting notices even are a big deal because it means that you're constantly undercapitalized, running out of money and grasping at straws potentially, which is, like Louisa said, a risky play to invoke this 2-year loophole. And that's what's going on with TMC. And that's why other companies with potentially bigger pockets or related to states that can bide their time are biding their time. And the last thing I want to say about this is it's extremely important that whatever happens with the metals company in Nauru in the next year, this conversation about seabed mining is not going away. A moratorium matters no matter what happens, because those other companies are there in the wings waiting. So it's very important that we don't take our attention off this issue no matter what happens with the metals company. Thanks.
Thank you, Bobbi-Jo, for that wonderful answer. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add to that? No, wonderful. So I think, oh, Kaja, please go ahead.
I just wanted to and just a very brief point to mention as well, that we're talking about mineral exploitation, if possible, at several thousand meters depth, like 3,000-4,000 meters depth. And that sometimes I think we forget when we speak about this, that this is not 100 or 200 meters where, you know, for instance, oil and gas activity in Norway happens at that depth, but this is several thousand meters. So technologically, this is extremely expensive to develop. And today, there is no technology that would allow mining to happen at these depths. So just to add to Bobbi-Jo's point as well, that this is also very expensive to develop. This is not something you do in a year or two. This takes extreme amounts of testing and failing, if it is even possible to develop this technology. So I think that might also be an added factor onto the uncertainty, but also the reason why we're not seeing companies kind of running towards this at this point. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And so I think there is a question that came in as well. I see that kind of ties into Bobbi-Jo's points on TMC and grasping for straws in Nauru. And so the question is, why did Nauru consider deep sea mining in the first place? Is there a particular reason why have they partnered with TMC? So I'll open whoever would like to take that one, or I can hand it off. Okay, I'm going to pass back to you, Bobbi-Jo.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. And then Sean, I would love you to jump in also. I'll just say that it's not that Nauru sought out TMC, I don't believe. So TMC, the metals company, has existed as such for just a couple of years, was previously Deep Green Metals, and the people involved, there are some good org charts out there, but the people involved are very similar to Nautilus Minerals, which had a failed venture in Papua New Guinea. They're very similar to DSMF, Deep Sea Minerals Finance Corporation. And these companies are in the Pacific courting Nauru, Tonga, the Cook Islands, Kiribati, and, you know, promising, benefits from seabed mining in the form of royalties or of taxes. And that's what I'll say about that. And then would love for anyone else to jump in.
John,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
I think that was well put, Bobbi-Jo. I would agree with everything that you've just said. And I think that if you look at Nauru's history and current context, Nauru is a tiny island nation of 10,000 people. It had a large phosphate mining sector a couple of decades ago, which caused, am I hearing echoes? Is it okay? Am I echoing?
No, you're good.
No.
I think you're fine. Yeah,
You can hear me.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So the phosphate mining industry in Nauru ravaged the landscape and ravaged the environment. And so Nauru then needed other economic alternatives to move forward. It, for a time, hosted the prison camps or the refugee camps for Australia. That has also wrapped up. And so as at this point, as one of the smallest island states, low-lying island states, looking at the impacts of the climate crisis, Nauru is in the front line as a number of Pacific Island states are. And so as Bobbi-Jo indicated, when a large company comes with promises of great wealth and great potential, you can understand why this might be something to seize on as an economic way forward.
Awesome. Thank you for those clear answers. And so I have another great one that's came in, and it's a great one because if you're not directly involved in the process day by day, I'm sure the International Seabed Authority can be quite confusing. And so the talks in Jamaica last for 3 weeks. Can someone please explain the format, key meetings, and timings to follow? And so I'm going to pass this over to Kaja actually to start, please.
Thank you. Well, I will start, but as I've only been to the International Seabed Authority once, I will probably pass it to Sian or someone else who's been there a couple of more times. But I can first of all agree that yes, the ISA is a bit of a confusing entity, and I totally agree with Sian said earlier that it is a bit difficult to predict exactly what will happen when you're on the ground because things are developing quite a lot when you're there. But what we've seen so far in terms of the plan, it's the first 2 weeks is the council meeting. So that's a subset of the countries. That's kind of the governing body. That's where they'll be discussing the 2-year rule, what to do with the contract if it comes in. That's where they're having these discussions that were also held in March. And I think from the last agenda I saw, those discussions are now scheduled for Friday, both of the Fridays. So the first Friday of the first week, there will be a discussion on what's called the what if scenario. So what do you do if a contract is submitted without regulations being tabled and approved, which is very unlikely. And then on the second Friday, but then from experience, at least from the last time, there will be a lot of talk going on at the ISA and things will develop there. And then the third week is the assembly, which is all of the countries gathering. So that's a yearly event. And I haven't attended the assembly, but Sian, perhaps you have. So maybe you would like to fill in a bit on how that works.
Well, I think you've done an excellent job describing it, Kaja. I would say that there isn't a formal agenda for both the council and assembly meetings that I don't know, Travis, if perhaps you could share with our audience set afterwards. I would also just point to the DSCC negotiations tracker, which is on our website. So we have a team who will be on the ground because the formal agenda, as Kaja has indicated, is only a rough guide to how the discussions are actually going to take place. So these things sort of ebb and flow with their own dynamic once things get underway. What the negotiations tracker will help you do is keep track of how things are proceeding against the agenda and critically what key country interventions are. So where the political winds are blowing on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, hopefully deciphering a bit of what the ISA is and its different organs and all the meetings that they have every year. So thank you. Another great question that has come in is, so I would like to ask exactly what needs to be agreed at the ISA meeting in Jamaica. And so is this a make or break moment for deep seabed mining rules? And what happens if nothing is decided in Jamaica? Wonderful question. And so I think I will hand it to Louisa to start.
Yeah, great question. So I think, for the industry, it is a pretty make or break moment. As we said, they have really hyped up this year as this is going to be the year we get a green light for deep sea mining. This has to be the year which we start. And, particularly given the rate at which the metals company is burning through cash and doesn't have a lot left, you can see that the stakes are very high for them. However, I think what we need to see is that really strong signal from governments that actually they do not feel comfortable approving deep sea mining at this point, that, in order to uphold their obligations to protect the marine environment, which are legal obligations in the law of the sea, it is simply not possible for them to give that go-ahead to deep sea mining now. There are a number of ways this could happen. This could happen in the council meeting with a decision about the process that they could follow if an application comes forward, but also through this proposed general policy, which again, I think is a real sign that we're seeing governments actually take a much more active role in asserting their potential to really protect the marine environment at the International Seabed Authority. We know that we are right in the middle of, a very live debate right now. There are, as we said, a handful of governments that are interested in deep sea mining, that are trying to push it through. But then we have this large number of countries who, have concerns about deep sea mining. And I think where we're seeing a real emerging consensus is a desire from countries not to give the go ahead, particularly when there are no rules in place. They do not want to see a cowboy industry in our deep ocean across the global oceans. So I think, if there is no clear decision from the meetings, either the council or the assembly, that will emphasize the urgency of governments finding, escalating the issue in a diplomatic way. We've obviously seen leader-level declarations from governments, including the president of France using his speech at the climate conference last year in Egypt to call for deep sea mining not to be allowed to start. I think that's, again, we're going to need to see a lot more governments really stepping up. But, if they aren't able to, reach a clear decision, that's also really not good news for the industry who really want to be able to move ahead. So, I think it's really important that as we see this debate continue to get scrutiny, actually more and more governments are, siding with the side of caution and of protection. And so continuing to hold out, making sure that we're not seeing a weak compromise from governments is incredibly important, because, this is quite a black or white issue. It is, do we allow deep sea mining to start or not? And that's why we really need to see that clear leadership from governments, rather than being sort of forced into a weak agreement, which could allow the industry to sneak through and to actually start causing harm to our oceans.
Thank you, Louisa, for that. Yeah, we don't want to sleepwalk into deep sea mining as a global community. So thank you. Another great question has come in. Can you please explain more, how does deep seabed mining, or how will it affect the indigenous communities in the Pacific? And so I want to start with Bobbi-Jo, who's done some amazing work on underwater cultural heritage, then maybe pass to Louisa with Greenpeace, who's done a great job of bringing actually some of the indigenous representation from the Pacific to the ISA. And so Bobbi-Jo, over to you.
Thanks. That's a great question. And first, I want to start by saying that there are some really awesome resources online. You can listen to Pacific Indigenous leaders explain this in their own words, which would be, definitely a better job than I could do. But I'll say something sort of related, and then I'd love for Louisa to speak to this. When we talk about underwater cultural heritage, we have UNESCO and we have treaties 2001 and 2003, I think, on the cultural heritage we all share underwater. And that includes both things like shipwrecks and human remains. And it would also include intangible cultural heritage, which can be defined as the way people relate to parts of the ocean. And the deep ocean holds a really important place in a lot of origin stories throughout the Pacific, including in Native Hawaiian origin stories. And also the idea of the ocean as part of a family or a resting place of ancestors is important. And also the way that people use the ocean for wayfaring. And I'm going to speak super briefly also to, we haven't talked much at all about this on this call, but fisheries. The sediment plumes from seabed mining have been shown to spread up to thousands of kilometers, and they can interact with important species that form the bottom of food chains that we all rely on, but they can also directly affect commercially important species, for example, tuna. And they can affect, there's been some great work showing where those plumes could potentially go, and Pacific islands stand to be most affected. I think Kiribati and Hawaii come up a lot in the modeling. But those are two really key ways that Pacific Indigenous people might be directly affected by seabed mining.
Thank you, Bobbi-Jo. To you, Louisa, thank you.
Yeah, so I think, to add on to those, the risks to cultural heritage, the risks to food security as well, from pollution of fisheries. There's also, the real concern from many Pacific activists and communities about being left to pick up the bill when things go wrong with this industry. It's already been mentioned that even in the testing phase, we've seen incidents, with a Belgian company getting their robots stuck on the sea floor for several days. We've also seen when the metals company did testing last year, this pollution incident of, material from the deep ocean being discharged directly into the surface waters. So, this is already very concerning to see, even at this sort of exploratory phase, incidents occurring. And I think the liability that may fall on Pacific Island nations, including those that are sponsoring deep sea mining, is something of great concern. Does that open up these nations to financial risks, to potential lawsuits because of the risks of environmental liability? And it's already been mentioned, trying to restore the damage from deep sea mining, if it is allowed to go ahead, would essentially be impossible and would be incredibly costly. A Planet Tracker report that came out last week said, it would be so expensive that no one could afford it. But I think particularly, the risk of nations that have already, faced significant financial hardship. This is an increasing concern because of the power imbalance we're seeing with the structure of the deep sea mining industry, where a handful of private companies, all headquartered in North America or Europe, are acquiring licenses. I think just 3 companies based in Europe and North America control 500,000 square kilometers of the licenses to explore for deep sea mining at the moment. So we're seeing a real monopolization and a corporate monopolization of the global commons. And again, we're seeing both the decision making being centered in the global north, but also, the potential benefits again would, be channeled to the global north. And the lobbying we've seen from these private companies at the ISA is very much designed to maximize corporate profits, while very little time, really very, very few substantial moments in the ISA have been dedicated to benefit sharing. And given that the International Seabed Authority is legally designated as the common heritage of humankind, we're really not seeing that play out at all in the negotiations. So it does look like there is a lot at risk and very little, if anything, to benefit for Pacific communities. And I think that's really why they've been at the forefront of the resistance to deep sea mining and successfully kicking out companies who have tried to mine in their own waters, for example, in Papua New Guinea, where the government was left with a significant bill after Nautilus Minerals went bankrupt.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Louisa. And that was one of the other questions of who stands to actually benefit from deep seabed mining. I think you pointed directly to a select few in the global north that will reap the benefits while the rest of us have to pay the price. And so thank you for that great answer. And so we have 3 minutes left. So I think this will be our last question, but I think it's a very important one, particularly for folks like you who are journalists or a part of the media. And so we've seen the ISA not being the most transparent organization within the world, having a pro-mining bias. And so what do you think the situation will be at the ISA, keeping out journalists and civil society as it has happened in previous meetings? And so I think I'm going to pass to Sian to start for this one.
Yeah, thank you, Travis. It's an excellent and important question, and well-timed, because the ISA has just put out a new set of restrictions. So we can share that link with you as well, unless you've probably seen them already if you're planning to attend. But some of the key points that they're constricting ever further, and this is part of a trend that has been taking place over the last few years already at the ISA. But participants need to register, and as they register, they agree to terms and conditions of the new bulletin, which are ever tighter in terms of the restrictions. Demonstrations, protests, and non-authorized actions or other political acts are prohibited. There's also guidelines around off-site actions in an area in the vicinity of the Congress Center. Inside the conference rooms, any documents or statements for distribution must be authorized by officials of the ISA. And then there's a number of restrictions and guidelines as well around filming, around photographs, when video and audio recordings can be allowed, etc. So there's a very clear move to constrain and control.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so we are 1 minute from the hour. And so I think we do have to close there. And apologies to everyone that we didn't get to your questions. We will save the chat and try to follow up individually. For those that have specific questions or ask questions about country positions, we recommend checking out the negotiations tracker that the DSCC hosts on our website, where we have information about each country's individual positions based on statements that they've made at the ISA. And so that will be a helpful spot to find some of that information. As well, we have recorded this session, so we will be circulating it afterwards. And then as well, we will be circulating our press briefing kit that contains a bunch of different materials, contacts, press briefings, quotes, etc. for those that are interested. And so I do want to thank our panelists and speakers today who did a wonderful job. We heard about, the state of play at the ISA, the growing momentum of support, why it's very clearly why deep seabed mining is not the path towards decarbonization, and really that we do not need these minerals to fuel that green transition. And so, we're moving towards a momentum, and so we'll see you all online as the DSCC and its members head towards the ISA next week for the 3 weeks. And during that time, of course, if you do have any questions that arise, please feel free to reach out to us at the DSCC and our members, and we will do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. And so with that, we're at the hour. We will close, and thank you so much for joining.